But often the consequence of self-love is the various ways that we try to compensate. So the real clues that there are issues around self-love, which by the way is true for most people, is really strong achiever patterns, such for example. So if we're constantly driving and pushing and striving to get somewhere, what's underlying that is the kind of basic core belief that I'm not enough as I am. Welcome to Thoughtful Thursday. For this week's Thoughtful Thursday, I wanted to talk about cultivating self-love. This is partly a follow-up to Tuesday's Therapeutic Tuesday with Katrina, where I think the title of the video is Self-Love Calms the Nervous System. Part of what we got into is the importance of self-love to help soothe and settle ourselves. This theme of self-love is enormous. So it's much more than I'm going to be able to cover in a few videos. And I'm sure it's something that, as this daily vlog and podcast evolves, I think it's something we'll come back to lots and lots of times in different ways. It's actually also one of the key themes of my hopefully forthcoming book, which I have slated for March sort of time next year, which is working title of 3 Relationships. And one of the key themes of that whole book is self-love, and particularly the first relationship, the first part, which is kind of chronicling my own journey of my own path to, I guess, self-love, my own relationship with myself. So it's an area that I'm very passionate about. I think is therapeutically immensely important. I think it's also often missed. I think, you see, the thing is that lack of self-love rarely expresses itself as that. It is true that people will come across as being very hard and judgmental and giving themselves a hard time. But often the consequence of self-love is the various ways that we try to compensate. So the real clues that there are issues around self-love, which by the way is true for most people, is really strong achiever patterns, such for example. So if we're constantly driving and pushing and striving to get somewhere, what's underlying that is the kind of basic core belief that I'm not enough as I am, that I'm not lovable the way I am, so I have to go and do and achieve all of this stuff so that I will then be lovable. It's not the only reason why people achieve. Of course, there's many reasons why people have ambition and drive, and some that can be very healthy. But when it's driven in an unsustainable or unhealthy way, that's often one of the primary motivations. Same thing for helper patterns. Again, there's lots of healthy and wonderful reasons to be helpful and supportive. But when we're ultimately giving to others what we deep down long for them to give to us, like there's a sense of if we just give enough, then we'll get back and we'll be lovable. Again, that's driven by a sense of not feeling self-love. If we can say this for perfectionist patterns, when we have to get it right because we're not lovable if we don't get it right. There's lots of examples of this, but the point that I want to make is that rarely do people walk around, rarely do we walk around kind of going, I don't love myself, I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, although that we may be sometimes aware of that. The energy goes into the compensation. The energy goes into the strategies we use often on a very unconscious level to try and deal with and fix that underlying issue. Becoming aware of that is really important and a very it's a critical step in self-development, because a lot of the literature, a lot of the popular psychology and self-development material that's out there is kind of in the category of how to become the person you want to be, like how to be more successful or how to be, a happier person, or how to, win friends and influence people is a very, very famous book. And underlying all of that really is this idea that we're not enough as we are. And if we can just get all of that, then that will fix and resolve that problem. So if we can become aware that that's what's going on, that at the core, the drive to achieve or to be successful or to help people or be there for others or to be seen as a good person is driven by this inner deficit, this kind of inner hole of not feeling enough, then at least we can start to deal with the real issue rather than just trying to get better at the patterns of compensation, which really is a bit like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, because we're just not dealing with the issue of what's going on. So how we do that is, again, it's an enormous area, and I just want to touch on a few pieces. So we start to cultivate self-love really by the way that we relate to ourselves. If we are ignoring, rejecting, uncaring, ungenerous towards our own feelings, emotions, symptoms, body feedback, that is an ongoing act of unkindness to ourselves. It's a perpetuation of the pattern. We learn how to relate to ourselves primarily by our primary caregivers when we're a kid. And that may have been our parents, it may have been grandparents, it may have been siblings, but whoever was responsible for looking after us and being around us related to us in certain ways. They related to our feelings in certain ways. They related to our needs in certain ways. They rewarded us for certain things. They punished us for other things. And a lot of that taught us how to relate to ourselves. It creates an internal kind of model of how to be with our own experience. And unless we do something proactively and deliberately to become aware of that and change that, there's a very good chance that even if we are totally different towards other people, if we had our own kids and we're not repeating any of those patterns that were used towards us, probably we are still relating to ourselves in that same way. So understanding where this comes from and the history and how that's been set up is also really helpful. The next step is often working on our inner critic. What keeps that structure in place, and this is why I emphasize this so much in some of the different online programs and courses that I run, is the inner critic is the glue that tends to keep these patterns and structures in place. So if we can start to recognize our inner critic, we can identify the attack, we can defend, we can get some distance from it, that allows us to start to change some of this relationship that we have with ourselves. The next thing is really on a moment-to-moment level, beginning to change how we are with ourselves. And again, this is I'm kind of giving an entire online program's worth of content summarized in a few short points. So if it feels like we're kind of skipping over stuff, I apologize, but I just wanted to conceptualize this at least in a video. But the moment-to-moment ways we're being with ourselves, this kind of model that I was saying tends to be programmed by early childhood. Often 0 to 7 is the primary impactful period. If we can start with a bit of space from our inner critic, if we can start to relate to ourselves differently. So if, for example, let's say you're watching this video, and which you are, or listening to this audio, and your inner critic right now is starting to say to you, oh my God, you're so messed up. Oh my God, you totally have all these issues, and what will people think? And that none of this stuff that Alex talks about will ever work for you because you're way more dysfunctional. You start to notice that, and maybe you defend a little bit against those inner critic attacks if you've been taught some tools how to do that. Then what you're left with is some feelings. And that may be the feeling of sadness or hurt or not feeling enough or feeling deficient or feeling needy. The way you relate to that, do you reject that? Do you try and fix that? Do you judge that? Do you try and distract yourself away from it? The way you relate to that is really how you're shaping self-love in this moment and going forwards. One of the most powerful acts of self-love and self-care is simply to make space for and allow our feelings and emotions. So if you can defend against that and you can start to feel the feeling of vulnerability or sadness or hurt or whatever, and just make space for that. Just like if there was a small child that was upset and distressed, and you just kind of hugged them and loved them and just in that moment gave them contact and gave them holding, very often that alone will calm the nervous systems. Goes back to Tuesday's video that self-love calms the nervous system. They would soothe and they would settle. And sometimes that alone would be enough. Other times there'd be other ingredients to helping change that. But just being present to, just making space for, just honoring and listening to our feelings and emotions is an incredibly powerful act of self-care and self-love. So it's a kind of movement from being caught in a kind of I have to achieve, I have to help, I have to be there to do all this stuff to get love, to the kind of recognition that that's actually an avoidance of a feeling, getting space from the inner critic and defending and from that, becoming aware of what we're feeling, and then simply giving space to allowing and being present to what we're feeling. As I say, I've just described what is often quite an involved therapeutic journey with lots of things to navigate and pieces along the way, and skills and tools and techniques that help that. But I just wanted to give some more conceptual framework, at least, around why I think self-love is important, but also some of the steps that we might take towards cultivating that. As I say, we will come back to this. I will it's inevitable in more of the mini sessions. This will come up as a theme because it's a core theme in the work that I do with people. Tomorrow we have Flourishing Friday, and in Flourishing Friday tomorrow, sort of developing from this. Remember, Flourishing Fridays are targeted primarily at practitioners, but they're relevant really to anyone, I guess, that's interested in self-development or particularly in any kind of caring role. So tomorrow I'm going to talk about why authenticity matters. Why, as a practitioner, being authentic, being yourself, is a really, I believe, a really important ingredient and quality. So I look forward to talking with you guys tomorrow.